If you've been teaching for 30 years like me, or this is your first year, back to school 2022 has been harder than ever. The kids are bright and excited, and it's still very hard. And there's also this disconnect. We got into teaching because we love kids, we love our subject. But for most adults, including those who like to give us advice, the way they envision teaching and the way teaching actually is very different. There's a big disconnect between these two. So I hope to offer to you today some ideas for your teacher life, to keep your teacher life in balance as we head into this school year. Don't take student behaviors personally. Like, it's not about you. And once we get triggered, it can be really hard to recover from. For example, some rude gesture or something disruptive, say they throw something very targeted to a student that's bullying based on their gender, presentation, or race. All these are very triggering for us. And then the minute we're triggered, all these thoughts run through our head, like, what happens if the principal walks in the room right now? And beyond that, even if you're like me, where I've taught for so long that I'm not really worried about the principal, but I am worried about the learning. And I'm thinking, the learning, but the learning. So the first thing I have to recognize is, hey, I've been triggered here. My heart's racing. I've been triggered. And before I say anything or do anything, I got to take a deep breath. Because I'm the only adult in the room, so I have to gain control of myself. And the minute I'm out of control, the whole class is out of control. With kids, we're the only adult in the room. We have to take a deep breath. We have to pause so that we don't just say the first thing our lizard brain wants us to. And acknowledging it, it's also like really important to kind of keep it real, right? I mean, we just have to keep it real. And I guess this is where it's really important to loop back to the thought, this is not about you. And before you take action to manage the behavior or redirect the student, it's really important to ask, what is the behavior telling you? Is the student bored? Is the student feeling called out? Is there some machismo at play? Is there something cultural that I don't understand because it's not a culture that I'm familiar with? Might the student be feeling silenced? Might the student be feeling called out? I just try to quickly toggle in my brain to what I felt like in different classes. And then once I kind of have an idea what the student needs now, then I make the behavior decision. I will, if you want me to talk more about what you would do and to kind of redirect students, that's outside the scope of this video. Go ahead and leave a comment below if you want me to get in more detail on that. Number 2. Routines, and the routines are for you, routines are for your students. So a routine is basically just a set of behaviors that we're going to do when we're working with certain materials, when we're doing a certain activity, and they really expedite transitions. Because when we, for instance, I'm going to use the example of the individual whiteboards. So if I'm using an individual whiteboard, each student has a marker, a whiteboard, and an eraser, and that's a lot of materials out there in the classroom that can be misused. So before I hand them the materials, I'm going to be very explicit about the routine. So every time we use the whiteboards, every time we use the whiteboards, we do X, Y, and Z. By being very upfront about what you want them to do, you can prevent behaviors in a positive way, rather than having to negatively call out a behavior. I need to take the time to let them know, 1, the purpose, and 2, what is the routine? Like, what are the steps? And by using individual whiteboards, I'm checking for understanding for each and every student very quickly. And I'm also giving real-time feedback to writing because I do not want to spend my Sunday afternoon correcting paragraphs or giving feedback that when I hand it back to them, they're going to crumple up and put in the recycling bin. Not going to do that. So the writing feedback I'm giving in real time with the whiteboards. The point is that I have to be very explicit about what they should and should not be doing with these whiteboards. So I'm not going to hand them any of the materials, anything that we're doing until I've gone over the expectations. And I try to keep it really simple. I limit the expectation list to 3 because I know I can't hold more than 3 in my head at one time for the routine. And if the materials are often misused somehow, I overtly state that it's for learning purposes only. I may even post a copy of the expectations on the board. When they're in the middle of the activity, students can forget what the expectations were. So I add in the middle of the activity, and if it's the first time we're doing the activity, maybe twice into the middle of the activity, what I call a jolt bolt. So that jolt bolt is to remind students what the expectations are. And so it's right in the middle of the activity, up will come a PowerPoint slide that reminds them of the expectations, the 2 or 3 expectations. And we will then evaluate as a class community how we're doing on those expectations. And I'll take that opportunity to really call out individual students who are following the expectations and thank them for contributing to the class community. This all feels very positive because remember, my whole purpose to telling you these tools are to improve your well-being as a teacher, to increase your satisfaction as a teacher. And the more positive vibes we can get going in the classroom, the more we can run with it. And it's the same is true with negative vibes. Like once the negative vibes come in, it's really hard to come back from that. Another word for routine, which is what the education word for this is ritual. And we can't underestimate the role of routines or rituals in humans because they activate certain attitudes in humans. It also feels very reassuring to students because as soon as you say, okay, now we're using the individual whiteboards, remember the expectations, it's reassuring to the kids with anxiety, okay, I know what's gonna happen now, no surprises. And by being really upfront with the expectations, you can also reassure those kids with anxiety. It's just, and it's also reassuring to you because when you get into the same mode, you can just kind of, once the expectations are in place, you can focus on the learning. And can be magic. Make students part of the solution, not the problem. This can be transformative. It can be hard to do, but it's worthwhile. And the first step to doing this is when something goes wrong in class, maybe the activity didn't go as well as you had hoped, or maybe the kids were distracted. Rather than you taking on that responsibility all yourself because you're the only adult in the room, no, we're a class community. Bringing it to the students and saying to the students, hey, that activity didn't go as well as I had planned. Can we redesign it? Elevating their expertise again. Also, it gives them an increased responsibility for the classroom culture by making them feel like, wait a second, I have a role to play, not just in my own learning, but in the class community. And it takes some of the burden off of the teacher. And the other piece that is really important, I'm a white lady teaching, I would say there are only 2 white girls in the whole class, and those white girls are 40 years younger than me, right? So I don't really have anything in common with these students, probably. So I have to access the expertise and perspectives in the classroom. When I asked my students what languages they spoke, 90% of them spoke at least another language. Some of them spoke 5. So they have lots of expertise that I don't have. And by making them part of the solution, it allows me to bring any kind of vibe problem to the kids. And kids are pretty responsive to the vibe being off. The challenge is you as the teacher have to be willing to take as much feedback from your students as you give to them. And that's what a real community would be anyway. At least take the grain of the feedback. Once you're able to liberate yourself and not tie your identity to student feedback, it's very liberating. It's not a personal attack feedback. In order for this to work, though, you really need to get to know the hidden mysteries and talents of your students. Finding out what their interest is. Do they have some kind of superpower that you don't know about? Remember, one of my students was a PHP expert at 15 and was being recruited for jobs when he was 15. Unless I asked, I would never know that. When hackers took over my printer, I had him in my corner to save me. Number 4, call out the positive behaviors over and over and over again, and with a thank you. Now, I know this is not natural for most cultures. It's just not the way we naturally operate. But I'm here to tell you that you can retrain yourself to be like this. Calling kids out by name, thanking them. Carlos, thank you for following these expectations. I really appreciate you modeling it for the other students. By calling that out, you're reinforcing the student's identity as a good community member. If I do that to Carlos, say 5 times, and now I have to, redirect Carlos later, I'm much more successful at redirecting because I can say, yes, Carlos, but remember, this is the purpose of this activity, so I need you to follow these expectations. And then Carlos is way more likely to do that because he feels seen in your class and he feels valued in your class. I'm going to extend this to perspective sharing. So it's not just positive behaviors, but inviting their perspective. And then when there's a conflict between a student and the class community, it's much easier for you to let them know that you are listening to their perspective, but in this particular case, the class community needs them to do X. They're just way more responsive to it. It's also an important piece of this is for you to call out your own perspective. Normalize that I only have one perspective and I'm one member of the class community. I'm an important member of the class community because I'm the only adult, right? It's really, really important for the kids to feel like an essential part of the community. Like, if the student feels like if they're absent today, I'm really going to notice, and it's going to very much impact the class community, they're much less likely to be absent. So when a student comes back after being absent, I can say something like, oh, I'm sorry, we missed you. We really needed your perspective yesterday. Would you be willing to come to tutorial after school and share your perspective? Or a student takes too long in the bathroom. You can say, oh, we really missed you. We didn't get your perspective in the last activity. So would you be willing to come to tutorial and share your perspective? That's a very different approach. Thank you for joining me today. I really hope that we can open a dialogue together. So I'm going to invite you to put any kind of challenges you have or questions you have in the comments, or anything you want me to say more about or demonstrate in the classroom. Just let me know in the comments. Thank you for what you're doing. And there are millions of kids every day that are happy that you showed up to work today.